Welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato. Our segment today is on the racial divide in America. The racial divide in America for the longest time was healing, which you can see on these graphs. We see that in 2001, relations between black and white Americans, 63% said were very or somewhat good, and only 35% very somewhat bad. And we see that holds relatively stable all the way until around 2013. And we're going to get to that 2013 point in a bit about why that's an important number. But we see a huge spike from 2013 to 2015, going from 30% saying very somewhat bad to 53%, and 70% saying very somewhat good to 47% saying very somewhat good. And we see that it dips a little bit so that good is defeating evil for a couple years there, and then by 2019, probably about 2018 actually, we see that there's a spike going back to the very somewhat bad being a larger number of Americans versus those saying very somewhat good. And so we have to ask ourselves why this is occurring. Why is this fomentation of racial tensions that keep people from uniting? Why is it happening? Well, we see here the numbers are even starker, are even more dire than we initially thought. Because in 2001, and this is both of these studies are by Gallup, we see that 70% of black adults in 2001 say that relations between white and black people is very or somewhat good, while only 62% of white adults say that relations between white and black are very somewhat good. So we see that actually, for a little while there, black Americans, African Americans, thought that racial relations were extremely good. We see in 2021, after media and entertainment fomented tension between white and black people, that 70% of black adults saying very somewhat good went down to 33%. So massive, massive, massive decrease, while white Americans went from 62% to 43%. Still a major difference, but less so than the difference in black Americans. And this is not because people suddenly got more racist. This is because media and entertainment organizations have been fomenting tension. And we can see that on this graph here. So this is a graph showing the New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, and Wall Street Journal. And we see right around 2013 on this graph that there's a huge spike. And we see that these organizations, these news organizations, suddenly start talking about racism and racists. Okay. It was much less prevalent in terms of the percent of all words used in these newspapers. But during that year and after that year, it became extremely prevalent for them to use that. And that is because news and media organizations, their role is to stop people from being able to unionize against oligarchs. It stops people from being able to vote out politicians working for oligarchs, and ultimately they want to stop people from being able to take back their country from the oligarchs. And so to do that, they need to divide and conquer people. And so those numbers you saw earlier, where people were happy 20 years ago with the racial situation in America, with race relations, they couldn't have that because united people could vote out, could work against the interests of the economic elite. And so because media and entertainment organizations are the propaganda arms of oligarchs, they're going out of their way to foment negative feelings towards people of other backgrounds. We can see this in the graph here on usage, and this coincided with the increasing public discussion on the topic. So this fomentation of tension, this magnification microscope that racial relations is under in America, that is something that is caused by news organizations. You can look up dozens of other woke terms, and it is all the same. These news organizations started using it, and then it became a part of the public conscience. When the powerful realized the people they were exploiting were finally starting to unite, which you see in about 2021, or in 2001, they used their propaganda apparatus to divide people again. I do want to make clear that I have also looked at the other causal direction, and have found far more evidence of media and entertainment causing the increasing tension instead of them just reporting on problems that were increasing already. And so media and entertainment organizations decide the Overton window. They decide what is a part of acceptable conversation, and they tell you that everyone is racist to a certain degree. They inject critical race theory in everything. They make sure that everyone feels like even if they're not consciously racist, there's intrinsic racism. It's a part of them. There's microaggressions, et cetera, et cetera. And so they decided on that. The media and entertainment organizations decided these are the things we're allowed to talk about. And the idea of people being colorblind or not racist, that's something that's not possible. Media and entertainment organizations, they also decide our morals. And so they decided what is allowed, what is not allowed, what we're allowed to value and what we're not allowed to value. And that goes back to the Overton window, right? They're telling us that we are evil people, we are awful people, that we have original sin, which is really interesting. They brought back the Christian idea of original sin and injected their own social justice, woke moralism into it. Media and entertainment organizations decide our real life decisions. I have an example here. I remember reading about how, I believe it was somewhere in South America, where two areas of South America with very similar economic situations, they were used as a comparison. One part of that area had access to, I think it was like soap operas, and another part did not have access to soap operas. And what you found was, because the soap operas, the people in those soap operas had fewer kids, they found a sharp decrease in the amount of pregnancies people had and the amount of kids they had if they watched soap operas, if there were soap operas available in their area. And they used the other group that didn't have access to soap operas but still had similar economic financial prospects as a comparison to see. And what they found was that media entertainment, such as these soap operas, had a large degree of influence over the amount of kids people had. And so if we're willing to allow media and entertainment organizations to have that degree of influence over us, how many kids we have as a family, then it's clear that we would also allow them to influence other real life decisions we have. So we have to ask ourselves, if this is the media and entertainment apparatus that is pushing us in this direction of decreasing race relations, why are we continuing along this trajectory if it makes no one happy? We see that the media and entertainment organizations, they're actually losing money with this type of behavior. But because they are propaganda arms of big business oligarchs, it's fine for them to lose money because they're supposed to be doing propaganda. If they make money, that's icing on the cake. But really what they're doing is they're supposed to be influencing public opinion, public behavior, public morals, right? And so big business and interest groups profit massively from this situation. They need people divided. They need to have people thinking and behaving in certain ways. And so we have to ask ourselves, are there any particular politicians or political parties that are more aligned with the interests of the oligarchs? And the answer is, and a number of people have mentioned this, Jimmy Dore, the great people at the Gray Zone, they all talk about this, but there's a uniparty. So all the parties in America, which in this case there's two parties, are a part of the uniparty. The right, left, Republicans, Democrats, they're responsible for it. And they just go back and forth deciding policies that are against the interests of the American people. And because of how our system is structured, you can't really vote them out. And so we have to ask ourselves another question. Are there any grassroots movements or organizations that are working towards combating the influence of oligarchs and promoting social and economic equality? And really the only answer I have for you there is probably the multipolar world order. Places like Russia and China are promoting social and economic equality. They're building things all across the world. They're helping to provide resources. They're helping countries that are sanctioned. I was reading some information showing that about 30% of the world is under like United States, EU, or United Nations sanctions. So almost a third of the world is under some form of sanctions or others. And so we have to consider this. What can we do to solve these problems, solve the increasing tension in America and in the West in general. And we see people just aren't happy with this state of affairs. And so, why continue along this path?